Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we are going to discuss selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express. We'll be discussing those topics from 13th September. And in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics. More logistics pacts on the cards. We'll see India has planned logistics pacts with Russia, the UK and Vietnam. So we'll see what are logistics pacts and how are they helpful. Then Nimhans develops new Indian brain templates. So we'll get to know what are brain templates, why do we need to develop them for India, and what is Nimhans. Then Preserve Progress says Jai Shankar. So this is about the Afghan peace process. This is part of the US plan to pull out of Afghanistan, and that meeting is taking place in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar. Next, as Bahrain says it's time to embrace Israel, the Gulf hears a Saudi voice. Like I told you in the last video, that after the Abrahamic Accords, which were signed between USA, UAE and Israel, now Bahrain is also going to normalize its ties with Israel. Now Bahrain is a very small country and it is heavily influenced by Saudi, especially after 2011. Basically Bahrain's society is Shia, but the ruling class is a Sunni minority. So they faced opposition during the Arab Spring of 2011. So they sought help from Saudi Arabia. So since 2011, Saudi Arabia has been dominating Bahrain. And Bahrain is also the headquarter of US base in the Gulf region. So Bahrain normalizing ties with Israel is a signal that Saudi would also do in the future. And without the concurrence of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain couldn't have made this announcement. Then Singapore Convention on Mediation comes into force. So we'll see what is Singapore Convention, we'll see what is mediation, and we'll see how this is related to India. Then science behind air breathing scramjet engine. This tells us about the engine of the HSDTV, high speed demonstration technology vehicle that we have just tested few days back, and that puts India in the elite club of countries having hypersonic technology. So we'll see how this engine works. Then foreign funds and NGOs. We have already discussed this topic in video 1 or 2. You can go back and check that. So we'll again look at what is FCRA. A counter coalition of Eurasian powers. This article is about SCO. So we'll get to know what is SCO, who all are members and what is it all about, and why are there some contradictions within it, and then why is phase 3 of vaccine trial complicated. In the last video I told you about all the phases of vaccine trial, so we'll look at them again and we'll see why phase 3 is more complicated. This comes in the backdrop that the trials of Oxford vaccine were halted in the UK after a patient reported adverse reaction, but now those trials have been resumed. So we'll see why phase 3 of vaccine trial is complicated. So let's get started. More logistics pacts on the cards. So India has already signed logistics pacts with all the countries in the proposed Quad: USA, Australia, and last week we signed with Japan. Now these logistics pacts are basically pacts that help countries to increase their interoperability and also help each other when they need help in terms of logistics and services. So now we are pursuing logistics pacts with Russia, which is very important because it will give us access to the Arctic. The Arctic region is becoming very important. The Arctic ice is melting, new routes are opening up, and also the region is rich in natural resources. So we also want to be stakeholders in the region, and signing a pact with Russia will help us. How? When we send our ships to the Arctic region, they will need resupplies in terms of food or fuel. So when we have an agreement with Russia, so our forces can approach Russia to help them out in terms of fuel, food, or any other supplies, or even in case of distress, whatever the help they might need. And it basically opens the door for such cooperation. We are also pursuing with Vietnam. Now, when we sign with Vietnam, again we have a foothold in the South China Sea. Now, India is also going towards South China Sea because China is increasingly making incursions in our strategic backyard called the Indian Ocean region. So when we have an agreement with Vietnam, then we can increase our reach to the South China Sea. And India also has the ambitions of creating a blue water navy. That means such a navy that can travel the entire world. So when we have agreements with countries in specific locations, then our ships can have the capability to travel any ocean and sea. So after concluding a logistical support agreement with Japan, India is now working on 3 such agreements with Russia, the UK and Vietnam. Now what is a logistics pact? Pact between 2 countries to use each other's facilities and provides for easier access to supplies and services for the military forces of the 2 countries when they are engaged in specific type of activities. Now those activities can be counter-terrorism, disaster relief, and many other types of activities that are mentioned in the agreements. Now what is the significance? India now has military logistics agreement with all Quad countries, Australia, Japan and the US. Now this will significantly improve interoperability as they will operate several common military platforms. And that is why we also conduct exercises. And basically the Malabar exercise, maybe this year it is going to be held in November, and maybe this year we'll see Australia also joining, and that will formalize the Quad. And this Quad is basically there to check China. So the utility of the agreements will be visible at the next edition of the Malabar Trilateral Naval Exercise scheduled to be held in November. So it is right now it is trilateral, but if Australia joins, it will formalize the Quad. An informal consensus has been developed to invite Australia to join the Malabar exercise, but a formal invitation has not been extended yet. Now what is the agreement with Russia? The agreement with Russia, the Reciprocal Logistics Support ARLS, is expected to be signed in October, when Mr. Putin and Mr. Modi will be meeting for a summit. So probably then we will be signing this agreement. Now what is the significance of the Russian agreement? Like I said, access to Arctic. Gives India access to Russian facilities in the Arctic region, which is seeing increased global activity as new shipping routes open up and resources become available. Now what all agreements we have signed so far? India has signed several logistics agreements in recent years, beginning with the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Understanding LEMOA with US in 2016, and the Navy has been the biggest beneficiary of them. So we have signed LEMOA, SISMOA, BECA with USA. There has been a sharp increase in India's maritime interaction with the Quad countries on a bilateral basis centered around information sharing for improved maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific. So again, India is covering its strategic backyard, Indian Ocean region, and it is also going towards the Indo-Pacific, basically the South China Sea and the area beyond, countering China. After India signed the foundational agreement, Communications, Compatibility and Security Agreement, COMCASA with the US, it got access to encrypted communication systems for seamless communication. Then with Australia, in June, India and Australia signed the long pending Mutual Logistics Support MLSA, elevating their partnerships to comprehensive strategic partnership. They also announced a joint declaration on a shared vision for maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So you can see India is making big forays in the Pacific, and recently our Air Chief also said that Our frontiers now are extended to the Indo-Pacific, and same thing the CDS. General Rawat also said that our conventional security concerns are being re-evaluated, and now we are also increasing our strategic geopolitical outreach. Japan, the logistics pact with Japan, reciprocal provision of supplies and services between armed forces was signed early this week. India and Japan have already signed an implementing agreement for deeper cooperation between the Navy and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. So now we are also building up alliances to check the Chinese aggression. NIMHANS develops new Indian brain templates. So we'll see what are brain templates and what are brain atlas, why the development is important and what is NIMHANS. So what is a brain template? Brain template is a gross representation from various brain images to understand brain functionality in diseased condition. Now this is very important. It is like anatomy of your body, so anatomy of your brain. Now because brain is such a complex organ, it is very important to have its imagery or template so that we can understand what regions do what. All the more important because they help us in combating different brain diseases. Now what is a brain atlas? It's like a geographical atlas, and like a geographical atlas helps you locate places on earth, this brain atlas would help you locate specific points in the brain. So it provides a standardized set of coordinates to determine specific sites within the brain. Now what is NIMHANS? The National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. This is the apex level institution in India for mental health and education related to neurosciences. So NIMHANS is the apex center for mental health and neuroscience education in the country. Now why is it important? Because till now we were reliant on the Caucasian brain templates, which were not very much suited for the Indian conditions. So now that we have Indian brain templates, our doctors and neuroscientists would have better tools available at their disposal to help other people. Now how did they do it? The neuroscientists studied over 500 brain scans of Indian patients to develop 5 sets of templates. So how many sets? 5 sets, and a brain atlas of 5 age groups covering late childhood to late adulthood, 6 to 60 years. So 5 sets of templates and 5 age groups of brain atlas. Now what is the significance of this? While some countries have their own scale to measure the brain, we are still dependent on the Caucasian brain template. This will significantly improve the accuracy and alignment and thereby reduce distortions, errors and biases in the final reports of brain structures and functions. So it will help increase the accuracy of our sciences and also the treatments that are given to people. SCO, a counter coalition of European powers. So in this article, we'll see all about SCO. We'll see what is SCO, what is its structure, what are the goals of SCO, why are there inherent contradictions in SCO, and the importance of bilateral meetings that take place on the sidelines of SCO summits or SCO sessions. Now, first of all, the question is, what is Eurasia? So Eurasia is nothing but Europe plus Asia. The largest landmass on planet Earth, Eurasia. Now, what is SCO? So SCO is nothing but a political, economic and security alliance of some Central Asian countries and 4 other countries. Basically, there are 8 members, 4 from Central Asia and 4 from neighborhood. So the countries that are members from the Central Asian region are Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And rest are the countries that lie on the periphery of these Central Asian countries like Russia, China, India and Pakistan. Only one Central Asian country did not participate in SCO, that is Turkmenistan, because Turkmenistan follows a policy called positive neutrality. So these are the 8 members, and then there are observer states like Afghanistan, Belarus. Belarus is also in news these days thanks to their president Lukashenko and the election problems that are there. Then Iran and Mongolia. Then there are dialogue partners Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cambodia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Turkey, and Turkmenistan attends as a guest attendee. So these are the countries that are associated with SCO. So SCO, or a Shanghai Pact, is a Eurasian political, economic and security alliance. When was it founded? In 2001. Who were the founding members? It was built on Shanghai 5 grouping of Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, which had come together in the post-Soviet era in 1996. So in 1996, they formed a group called Shanghai 5 and it had Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And in 2001, Uzbekistan also joined and they expanded it to form SCO. Now, why was it formed? It was formed in order to work on regional security, reduction of border troops and terrorism. A particular goal of all these years has been conflict resolution, and in fact SCO has been very successful in conflict resolution given its early successes between China and Russia and then within Central Asian republics. Now what are Central Asian countries? A group of 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan or the Kyrgyz Republic, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Now what is Shanghai Spirit? It outlines the principles of SCO in its Charter for Cooperation. So its Charter for Cooperation is based on Shanghai Spirit. Now the structure, the organization has 2 permanent bodies, the SCO Secretariat based in Beijing and the Executive Committee of Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, RATS, based in Tashkent. Now RATS is very, very important, and RATS is one of the reasons why India joined SCO in the first place. And what is Astana Declaration? In 2005, the Astana Declaration called for SCO countries to work on a joint SCO response to situations that threaten peace, security and stability in the region, indicating the group's strategic ambitions. So from 2005, the group started asserting its strategic ambitions after the Astana Declaration. So this was a sort of a summary of the article. Now let us look at some of the points from the article as well. Now before we do that, let us quickly look at the main goals of SCO. Its main goals, part of its charter that was adopted in St. Petersburg in 2002. Strengthening mutual trust and neighborliness among member states, promoting their effective cooperation in politics, trade, economy, research and technology and culture, as well as in education, energy, transport, tourism, environmental protection and other areas. So you can see the areas that SCO covers are extremely broad. Making joint efforts to maintain and ensure peace, security and stability in the region, and moving towards the establishment of a democratic, fair, rational new international political and economic order. So these are the goals of SCO. You don't need to remember them or learn them, just for your knowledge I'm telling you the goals. Now let us look at what the article says. We have covered the background of SCO and the main goals of SCO. Now just we'll start from here. In 2005, the Astana Declaration called for SCO countries on a joint SCO response to situations that threaten peace, security and stability in the region when they started asserting their strategic ambitions. Now Western and NATO countries were threatened because of this alliance, and this alliance has proved to be some success against NATO and Western countries, because when they placed heavy sanctions against Russia for its action in Crimea, China came to its aid, signing a 30-year, 400 billion gas pipeline framework agreement. And after that, the friendship between China and Russia has only strengthened. Since then, held by personal bond between Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping, the SCO has become a platform for Eurasian cooperation in a region rich with energy resources. And China's Belt and Road Initiative, which Russia is not a part of but supports and is joined by all members of SCO with the exception of India. So India does not join the Belt and Road Initiative, and India will not join the Belt and Road Initiatives because this initiative goes through the Gilgit-Baltistan region of India, which is in POK, and Pakistan has leased that area to China, and India objects to that because India considers that it is a part of India. So India deems that portion of the project to be illegal. Now, Chinese stakes are also very high because they have invested heavily, almost $40 billion in the CPEC project. And the CPEC project is one of the keystones of the whole Belt and Road Initiative. So India joining the Belt and Road Initiative is not very likely. Now, what are the contradictions? India and Pakistan joined SCO as observers in 2005 and were admitted as full members in 2015. Joining the SCO has been seen as one of the Modi government's more significant yet puzzling foreign policy choices. Because on one hand, we are going towards USA and probably the Quad, and on the other hand, we are engaging with China and Pakistan. Well, we have our reasons. Number one, I told you, rats. So through rats, we can put both China and Pakistan in a spot. And that gives us one more platform to bring out the activities of Pakistan, and it gives us a bargaining chip or a pressure point in the diplomatic circle. Other contradictions have also been noted. Since 2014, India and Pakistan have cut all ties, but they continue their ties in SCO, and as a matter of fact, they also participate in the counter-terror exercises of the rats. Talks and trade with each other, and India has refused to attend the SAARC summit due to tension with Pakistan. But both their leaderships have consistently attended all meetings of SCO's three councils, which are the three councils: Heads of State, Heads of Government, and Council of Foreign Ministers. So Mr. Jaishankar was there for Council of Foreign Ministers as well as other meetings. Despite the fact that India accuses Pakistan of perpetrating cross-border terrorism at every other multilateral forum, at the SCO, India and Pakistani armed forces even take part in military and anti-terrorism exercises together as part of SCO Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure, or the RATS. In addition, the two countries are part of SCO Afghanistan Contact Group to discuss the course of Afghanistan's future, and issue New Delhi and Islamabad are bitterly divided over. So through SCO, India gets one more chance to engage with Afghanistan as well, because USA has sidelined India in the Afghan peace process, and for us Afghanistan is very important. So we want one more access point to Afghanistan, so SCO gives us that platform. Now he talks about bilateral meetings, that how throughout the years the bilateral meetings, the informal meetings that have happened on the sidelines of SCO have helped mitigating many problems. Through the years, SCO hosts have encouraged members to use the platform to discuss differences on sidelines. In 2009, India and Pakistan held the first talks after Mumbai attacks on the sidelines of SCO summit in Astana. And in 2015, Prime Minister Modi met then Pakistani PM Nawaz Sharif at SCO summit in Ufa for a meeting that even resulted in joint statement. There have been no bilateral meetings between India and Pakistani leaders on the sidelines of SCO since then, because many things have happened, including the Pulwama attack. Thus, it should not have come as a surprise that the SCO host Russia encouraged and facilitated meetings between the defense ministers of India and China that happened on September 4, and foreign ministers of India and China on September 10 to discuss the standoff at the LAC. Now, if we talk about the charter, it doesn't allow any bilateral dispute to be taken up, but it provides a comfortable platform for building mutual trust, expanding cooperation, finding common ground, and eventually creating conditions for dialogue between countries. So this is all about this article that you should know. Why is phase 3 of vaccine trial complicated? So this basically explains the complications in phase 3 of vaccine trial. In the previous video, I have already explained the whole process of vaccine trials. Basically, what happens, there are different stages. First is the preclinical stage, which might take years to develop the vaccine candidate. Now, in case of corona, we have been able to fasten this because of the presence of supercomputers, and we are using the existing platform of adenovirus. Then there are phases. Phase 1 is when we test the safety, which is tested on a very small number of people, basically less than 100. Then phase 2, it tests for safety and dosage. between 100 to 300 people take part in this. For example, the Russian vaccine Sputnik 5 was just tested on 76 people before they released it. Then phase 3 happens, which tests for the safety and efficacy. Now these trials are large trials. They take across different geographies and demographies, and they take long time because results can be varied. Some vaccine might work on some particular population, it might not work on some other population, it might work in some particular condition and it might not work in some other conditions, and there could be long-term impact. So all that is evaluated in the phase 3 trials. It comprises of a large group of people who are tested upon, and then it is forwarded to the FDA or the CDCSO, which are the regulating agencies which give the license to release the product. FDA is the agency for US and CDCSO is for India or for any other country which is developing the vaccines. And then comes phase 4, which is the post-release phase. It is a continuous phase and they keep taking feedback of how actually the commercially released drug is doing and are there any side effects. Now I also told about the architecture of who regulates the vaccine trials in India. So I told about CDCSO, which is the apex authority for regulating vaccine trials, and then its official Drugs Controller General of India, and they get their powers under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940 and Drugs and Cosmetics Rules 1945. So I have explained this in detail in the previous video. See, basically these are the 4 phases. In phase 1, evaluate safety, determine safe dosage, identify safe effects. Now only 70% of drugs move to the next phase. In phase 2, it tests the effectiveness and further evaluates safety. And from this, only 33% of drugs move to the next phase. So this is also very stringent procedure. Then comes phase 3. It confirms the effectiveness, monitors side effects, compare to other treatments and collect information. I also told about the control group that is given placebo and the one that is getting the medicine. Approximately 25 to 30% of drugs move to the next phase. And finally, phase 4, provide additional information after approval, including risk, benefits and best use. Now let us see what the article says. How are vaccines and drugs tested in trials? There are similarities and differences in the way new drugs and vaccines are tested. Broadly, both follow a 4-stage process when they are tested in people. After a drug has proven itself safe in a variety of animals, usually mice, rabbits, hamsters and primates that mirror human physiology and the way it reacts to diseases, it enters phase 1 studies. A small group of volunteers is given the drug in small doses and monitored to see if it is safe and whether it was well tolerated. This is also when any occurrences of side effects are closely monitored. On an average, 10 to 15 candidates are chosen. In the normal course, those undergoing the trial must report results to the drug regulator, which gives the go-ahead for the next stage of trial. So the drug regulator in India is CDCSO and the DCGI. Now phase 2 is when a group of volunteers, usually in hundreds, are selected. This is the stage when researchers try to determine what dosage would be necessary for it to take effect to produce the desired response. So that means test for dosage. So in phase 1 we tested safety and in phase 2 the dosage. In case of COVID-19 vaccine, this is the stage when it's determined if the inoculation had triggered a desired level of antibodies and a sufficient cell response in terms of stimulating T cells that are known to block and neutralize the virus particles respectively. And again, side effects and adverse reactions are monitored and reported. Now, what is the difference about phase 3 part of the trial? Each of these stages takes several months, and that includes the time taken to recruit patients as well as the time involved in observing the effects of drugs and vaccines at various intervals of time. Such data is again sent to regulators who, if satisfied, give the green signal for phase 3. In this stage, the drug or vaccine is tested at multiple locations in thousands of volunteers or patients. In case of a drug, this is the stage when a new drug is compared to the existing standard of care and when it must prove that it is either more efficacious or is of similar potency but is safer, better tolerable, or delivers any of the goods that the drug makers had claimed when making the drug. In the case of a vaccine for a new disease, there is usually nothing to compare to it. So phase 3 becomes a larger version of phase 2 trial. A phase 3 trial is held at multiple locations to capture the demographic variability in the population. It is also double-blinded and randomized and may have multiple treatment arms, meaning some participants may get a placebo. Placebo is like sugar pills or just ordinary multivitamins. Some may get lower doses, some higher doses, and in an ideal trial, neither the doctor nor the recipient knows who is getting the drug and who the placebo. That is why truly randomized. When the scale and scope of a trial increases and a diverse population group is exposed to a new vaccine, the odds of encountering adverse and dreaded severe adverse reactions are magnified. So that is why we have to be very careful. When severe reactions are manifested, the medical researchers have to determine if the reaction was due to the drug and if a pattern is apparent. A drug or vaccine can be pulled out because of the multiple locations and number of patients that are required. This is also the most expensive stage of a trial. I've already told you about all these things. Sometimes phases are combined given the kind of drug or vaccine and the urgency of the situation. Several COVID-19 vaccines are being developed on accelerated timelines. Now, what happened in the case of AstraZeneca? There were adverse reactions in the patient. What happens in phase 4? It is a continuous monitoring of how the vaccine is doing. So this is all about this article. Preserve progress, says Jaishankar. For the first time, an Indian minister addressed a gathering that includes Taliban. So India has a formal stand that it does not recognize Taliban in any form. So we do not talk to Taliban regarding the Afghan process. We do not hold that Taliban are a legitimate party in Afghan peace process because they use violence and we observe the use of violence. And especially Taliban is anti-India and it has been heavily funded by Pakistan. So that is why we do not acknowledge Taliban. Now the Afghanistan peace process has started. It was part of the pull-out deal that Mr. Trump proposed. So in this deal, the Afghan government and the Taliban are talking and the talks are happening in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar. So our external affairs minister attended the meeting via video conferencing. So he had some words to say. Let us see what all he said. For the first time, an Indian minister has addressed a gathering that includes Taliban, which India still does not recognize. The government also sent a senior government official, MEA point person for Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and a delegation to the inaugural ceremony, which was attended by US Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation Abdullah Abdullah, 21-member Taliban delegation, and foreign ministers of several countries. Now, Mr. Jaishankar did not, however, mention the Taliban in his speech and said India's policy on Afghanistan remains consistent. And what is that policy? India believes any peace process must be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled. So these are the key words: Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled. So that means India does not want Pakistan or any other state calling the shots in the Afghan peace process. Has to respect the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Afghanistan and preserve the progress made in the establishment of a democratic Islamic Republic in Afghanistan. India also says the interests of minorities, women, and vulnerable sections of society must be preserved, and the issue of violence across country and its neighborhood has to be effectively addressed. He said, highlighting India's role as a major development partner. Wished for the success of the intra-Afghan negotiations in delivering to the people of Afghanistan what they have longed for, a peaceful and prosperous future in an independent and sovereign nation. The intra-Afghan negotiations were a key part of the US-Taliban and US-Afghanistan accords signed earlier this year as part of Trump administration's plans for pulling troops out of Afghanistan. I already told you about this in the introduction. According to the agreement, the US would facilitate the talks which were due to begin on March 10, and the Afghan government would release 5,000 Taliban prisoners while the Taliban would release 1,000 captives the militant group was holding. However, the process was delayed repeatedly as both sides delayed the release of prisoners, which also meant that, and also in the meanwhile, Taliban kept attacking different Afghan installations. It even attacked a hospital where women and little children were killed. So not very conducive conditions for talks. Let us see what really comes out of this Afghan peace process. Would it be successful or not? Foreign funds and NGOs. So we have already covered this in video 2, I think, about FCRA. So Government of India has been cancelling the registration of many NGOs who are receiving funds from abroad. Basically, some type of particular institutions require government clearance or registration under FCRA to receive funds abroad. Now, why is there FCRA? To ensure that the NGOs or organizations getting money from abroad are not working in a manner which is detrimental to the national security, sovereignty and integrity of India. And FCRA comes under the control of Ministry of Home Affairs. So let us quickly see. And now compliance with FCRA is very, very simple. You just have to fill a compliance form or a return annually, and that is a very simple procedure. So let us see what this article tells us. So what is FCRA? FCRA regulates foreign donations and ensures that such contributions do not adversely affect internal security. It was first enacted in 1976 and it was amended in 2010 when a slew of new measures were adopted to regulate foreign donations. The FCRA is applicable to all associations, groups and NGOs which intend to receive foreign donation. So this is a point which is also important for your prelims, that it is applicable to all associations, groups and NGOs which intend to receive foreign donations. It is mandatory for all such NGOs to register themselves under the FCRA. The registration is initially valid for 5 years. Again, an important point, that it is valid for how many years? Initially 5 years, and then it can be renewed subsequently if they comply with all the norms. So one at a time, 5 years. Registered associations can receive foreign contribution for social, educational, religious, economic and cultural purposes. Again, they can receive funds for which things? Social, educational, religious, economic and cultural purposes. Filing of annual returns on the lines of income tax is compulsory. In 2015, MHA notified new rules which required NGOs to give an undertaking that the acceptance of foreign funds is not likely to prejudicially affect the sovereignty and integrity of India or impact friendly relations with any foreign state and does not disrupt communal harmony. It also said all such NGOs would have to operate accounts in either nationalized or private banks. So which banks? Nationalized or private banks, and they also have to give undertakings that their activities are not detrimental to the sovereignty, integrity of India, relations with foreign state and does not disrupt communal harmony. So these are the key points that you need to know, and their account should be either in nationalized or private banks which have core banking facilities to allow security agencies access on a real-time basis. So this is the FCRA. Now the next is who cannot receive foreign donations. Members, individual members, remember political parties, initially they could not, now they can. Members of legislature and political parties, government officials, judges and media persons are prohibited from receiving any foreign contribution. And this is self-explanatory because these are the people who are in key positions, and if they receive money and kickbacks from abroad, their judgments or reportings could be highly prejudicial. However, in 2017, the Ministry of Home Affairs through the Finance Bill route amended the 1976 repealed FCRA law, paving the way for political parties to receive funds. Why? Because both Congress and BJP were getting funds from abroad, from the Indian subsidiary of a foreign company or a foreign company in which an Indian holds 50% or more shares. So at the end of the day, there are no ideological differences, only money. How else can one receive foreign funding? The other way to receive foreign contributions is by applying for prior permission. It is granted for receipt of specific amount from specific donor for carrying out specific activities or a project. So many specificities here. But the association should be registered under the statutes such as the Societies Registration Act 1860, the Indian Trusts Act 1882 or Section 25 of Companies Act 1956. A letter of commitment from the foreign donor specifying the amount and purpose is also required. So it's not easy to get money from abroad. In 2017, the MHA suspended the FCRA of Public Health Foundation of India, one of India's largest public health advocacy groups, on grounds of using foreign funds to lobby with parliamentarians on tobacco control activities. So lobbying in India is banned. It is allowed in some other countries, but in India it is totally banned. After several representations by the PHFI to the government, it was placed in the prior permission category. That first it will have to take permission or clearance from the MHA, then only it can receive the funding. Now, when is the registration suspended or cancelled? The MHA on inspection of accounts and on receiving any adverse inputs against the functioning of an association can suspend the FCRA registration initially for 180 days. Until a decision is taken, the association cannot receive any fresh donations and cannot utilize more than 25% of the amount available in the designated bank account without permission of the MHA. The MHA can cancel the registration of an organization which will not be eligible for registration or grant of prior permission for 3 years from the date of cancellation. So this is all mumbo jumbo. The important part was the keywords that I told you in the beginning. Have there any suspensions been in the past? Yes, it tells about the suspensions. And what about the international donors? Government has been cracking down on some foreign donors. The government has also cracked down on some foreign donors such as the US-based Compassion International, Ford Foundation, World Movement for Democracy, Open Society Foundations, and the National Endowment for Democracy. The donors have been placed on a watch list or in the prior permission category, barring them from sending money to associations without MHA's clearance. This is again a very political question, and their activities have been questionable in the past in India. So that is why they are placed under that list. But then again, there are people from both sides of spectrum and they have their opinion. So you form your own opinion as to why they were banned. Singapore Convention on Mediation comes into force. So this is a UN-backed convention, and it is the first convention to named after Singapore because Singapore worked very closely for making this convention a reality. Now this convention would help countries to raise their ease of doing business. See what happens? This is the age of multinationals or the MNCs that you call them. So they are operating across various territories and boundaries. So it might happen that they are having a legal dispute, but each country has a different legal regulation. So it creates a problem for companies to basically tackle these local legal problems or the regulatory problems. So this convention basically helps them through formalizing a process of mediation. Now what is mediation? Mediation is like a compromise, and it is said a win-win situation. Rather, in compromise there is win-lose, but mediation is said to be a win-win situation. And in mediation there is always a third party neutral person who comes and negotiates between the two parties to come at a acceptable solution to both. So let us see. Also known as the United Nations Convention on International Settlement Agreements resulting from mediation. So first of all, what is mediation? It is a procedure in which parties discuss their disputes with the assistance of a trained, impartial third person or persons who assist them in reaching a settlement. Now this is the first UN treaty to be named after Singapore because Singapore worked closely with this treaty. What will it do? It simplifies cross-border disputes. I've already told you, MNCs. It will provide a more effective way for enforcing mediated settlements of corporate disputes involving businesses in India and other countries, because India is also a signatory. That are the signatories of the convention. Now, how will it do that? Now, for example, you're a business and you are seeking to enforce a mediated settlement agreement, and you are, for example, settled in USA and you are operating in India. Now, there is local dispute. Someone has filed a case against you in India. Now, they threaten your Indian operations, so you can basically file a appeal for mediated settlement. So businesses seeking enforcement of a mediated settlement agreement across borders can do so by applying directly to the courts of the countries that have signed and ratified the treaty. Now see, the mediators would be specialists in international laws or trade disputes, so it will also reduce the burden on judiciary, and it will help saving time and cost for the companies. It will also make the procedure much simple, and simpler the procedure, greater the ease of doing business rankings, and greater the influx of FDI and other investments into the economy. So what are the advantages? It harmonizes and simplifies the enforcement frameworks across borders, saves companies from having to enforce the settlement agreement as a contract in accordance with each country's domestic processes. So it removes that ambiguity. It will lead to savings in time and legal costs, which are important for businesses in the time of uncertainty, especially the COVID situation, and in future, God forbid, if any other situation comes up. Now, how many members does it have? As on September 1, the convention has 53 signatories, including India, China, and US. So major economies who are looking to give a fillip to their business are also signatories. So it will help in easing the cross-border conflicts or disputes in companies, and it will help companies easily. So this is all about this video, folks. I hope this was helpful. Please connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. And please do subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you get notifications whenever we post videos. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a nice day. Namaste, Jai Hind.